Right, welcome everybody. Welcome to today's meeting of the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'd like to remind everyone that's present that this meeting is being broadcast live via the County Council's website and will also be available for viewing after the meeting. Can I please ask that you all ensure that mobile phones are switched to silent? Following Mrs Wright standing down as Chairman of the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee, I'd now like to seek nominations for the Chairman of this committee.
I'd like to nominate Mrs Richardson.
I'd like to second.
Can I please put it to a vote? Okay, Mrs Richardson, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Welcome to today's meeting of the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'd like to welcome our visitors who will speak at today's meeting. Sue Whiting and parents and teachers from Mapplewell Hall Special School. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live via the County Council's website and also be available for viewing after the meeting. Can everyone please switch their microphone on when speaking and then turn it off when finished speaking? I have received apologies from Carolyn Lewis and Mr Pendleton. As I've been elected as Chairman of this committee, I now ask for nominations for the position of Deputy Chairman. So,
may I nominate Councillor Seaton?
Do we have a seconder for Mrs Seaton?
I'll second that.
And can we have a show of hands, please, for Mrs Seaton? Okay. Our first agenda item is approval of the minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of September 2017. I propose that the minutes of the meeting are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Are we all agreed?
Agreed.
Yep, thank you. Item number 4, question time. We've received a question from Sue Whiting, understanding order 35. Could Mrs Whiting come up to the chair, please? Everyone should have a copy of the question and answer, which has also been provided to Sue, so these can be taken as read. I would like to remind members that no discussion is to be held on the question. Sue, would you like to ask a supplementary question? You can ask one supplementary question from your original question, but I must highlight that your supplementary question should be to clarify the response you've been given and should not raise any new issues. Thank you.
The question I have is that there is in the 12 to 16 bracket, there's 143 children who are educated out of county provision. Obviously there's a huge range of different things, but is there one particular need that seems to override other needs?
Thank you, Sue.
Thank you.
I'll now ask the officers whether they're able to respond. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Chair. There are a number of different reasons why children with education, health and care plans would be placed in placements which are situated in other local authorities. What we do know is that we have a large proportion of children with what we would call higher functioning autism and other associated needs that are placed within our independent provision. And it's a piece of work that we're doing within the department to look at how we can best meet their needs within the local authority.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We now move on to item 5. Questions asked by members under Standing Orders 7.3 and 7.5. I have received no questions from members. On item number 6, I've not been notified of any urgent items. So we move on to item 7, declarations of interest in respects of items on the agenda. Does any member have any interest they wish to declare? No? Thank you. Under item 8, declarations of the party whip in accordance with overview and scrutiny procedure rule 16. Do any members have any declarations? Thank you. Item 9, presentations of petitions under Standing Order 36. The petition on Maplewell Hall School will be presented today, and I'd like to take this under the next item on the agenda, as we have a report from the Director of Children and Family Services. I've not received any other petitions. So now we move on to item 10, proposals to consult on removal or closure of residential facilities at Maplewell Hall Special School. And I'd like to ask Paul Meredith, Director of Children and Families, and Jane Moore, Assistant Director Education and Early Help, to present the report regarding the residential facilities at Maplewell Hall Special School. This is on page 13 and 18 of your pack. And Dirk van der Wart, Engagement and Consultation Manager, will also join us for this item. Thank you.
Chair.
Thank you.
Jane Moore is going to present the paper on this one, and then Dirk will give us an overview of the consultation and the findings or the content of the consultation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to seek the views of the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Commission regarding the use of the residential facilities at Maplewell Hall Special School. And we ask for you to note the proposal to remove or close residential facilities within the school with effect from 2018, but also to consider the consultation responses that my colleague will share. We've outlined the policy framework and previous decisions in relation to this item, and you'll note that on the 15th of September, Cabinet did consider the report, which sought approval to consult on the removal of the residential provision, and it was resolved to commence informal or pre-consultation in this matter. Just by way of background, Maplewell Hall Special School is located in Woodhouse Eaves and has a capacity for around about 195 pupils with special educational needs and disabilities, as well as a 10-bedroom residential facility. The school does have maintained status and therefore is directly controlled by the local authority. The school caters predominantly for pupils with moderate learning difficulties and currently has around 183 pupils on roll. And this, in addition to this, are 20 pupils with designated autism spectrum disorder, which is a new facility that we have at the school. The school currently receives an allocation of £293,000 per year to support the residential provision. Paragraph 7 outlines how that funding's used. So it's used to provide extended activities on top of the school day, but also has regular pupil sleepovers attached to that as well. The residential provision is intended to support curriculum enrichment, but it's not designated as either respite or short break provision. The figures provided by the school indicate that the residential facility was used by up to 24 pupils per night, Monday to Thursday, and each student does have around about 12 to 14 nights attendance per school year. The number of available beds has now reduced due to 2 of the bedrooms being taken out, and more recent information provided by the school shows that there were around about 69 pupils using the residential facility. So this equates to about 37% of the school population. There aren't any pupils who are placed at Maplewell Hall Special School who are assessed as having the need for residential education provision within their education, health and care plan. The education, health and care plans are reviewed annually and are in place for children up to the age of 25 who need more support than is available through our special educational needs support system. And they identify the education, health and social needs for those young people. The closure of the residential facilities in September would allow for phased removal so that we can undertake assessments of need for those young people where required and put in additional support, if appropriate, to support those families and pupils affected by the change. We've outlined in paragraph 10, the process through which we need to go through should we go ahead with the proposed closure. And also I've outlined in paragraphs 11 onwards the consultation procedures as well. So it does comprise of 2 stages. The first stage, which ended at the end of October, was a period of informal pre-consultation, which was extended for 6 weeks. And my colleague will give you an overview of the feedback from that consultation. Following this, if Cabinet agrees, then there will be a formal consultation process following this. If I could just finalise by saying, just going through the resource implications outlined in paragraph 18, it is expected that the revenue costs associated with the proposals, if implemented, would be met within the existing service budgets. However, what we don't know at the moment is whether there will be any other additional revenue costs arising from removal of the facilities, and we've yet need to do some more work to understand that as well. But again, in paragraph 20, if I can just draw your attention to the full year savings, the savings that would come from the removal of the residential provision will total 293,000, which would be a partial year saving if agreement from September 2018. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just ask, as a point of order on the way you're dealing with this, you decided not to have the petition presented under the previous item. When are you proposing that we can know about the petition if we're discussing it now? I'm interested in the petition.
The petition will come in. We're getting the reports first, and then we will hear from the people concerned that are coming to speak. Okay, that's the usual way of doing things. Yes, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Jane. Sorry about that. I know we've got people who would like to speak to the committee on this issue. Oh, we're going on to Kirk first. Sorry, I beg your pardon.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Dirk van der Woord. I'm Consultation Engagement Manager at Leicestershire County Council. So the consultation on these proposals started on the 18th of September for a 6-week period until the 29th of October. Bespoke document setting out an overview of and background to the proposals and a questionnaire to enable consultees to provide feedback was available as hard copy at the school and on request, and online via the County Council and schools' websites. To support the consultation, 2 open meetings have been held at the school, which also provided a drop-in opportunity for parents to talk on a one-to-one basis about their child's needs. And these meetings were open to staff and residents and were attended by approximately 125 people overall. In addition, there have been discussions with representatives of the school's student council, attended by 15 pupils. Responses to the consultation have included a joint letter from the MPs for Loughborough and Charnwood, 252 responses to the consultation survey, and a petition from which we will hear more about, signed by 11,592 people. And I'll go into more detail about the consultation survey results. Now, the survey asked for views from parents, carers and other members of the public, including to what extent they agree with the proposal, how the proposal would impact them, and what could be done to support families and pupils and reduce any negative impacts. This slide here gives you an overview of the role in which and the capacity in which people responded to the survey, which was one of the questions. And it shows that respondents included 63 people who identified as a parent carer of a child attending the school, 20 members of staff, 20 pupils at the school, and also 17 parent carers who are considering sending their child to the school, and 20 members of staff of other schools. The largest group of people who responded to the survey identified as members of the public, and a further 30 respondents responding in other roles, and that includes family members or friends, ex-staff and parents of ex-pupils. Now, respondents were asked to what extent they agreed or disagreed with the proposal to close the residential facilities, and 235 respondents, that's 94%, selected strongly disagree, and a further 8 responses selected tend to disagree in response to this question. The remaining 3% or 8 respondents indicated that they strongly agree with the proposal. However, we further analysed the free text comments in response to the follow-up question, which is why do you say this, which 7 out of 8 people completed, and only one of those 7 responses indicated actual agreement with the proposal, and that comment said the cost is too much for the benefit of so few. The responses from the other 6 respondents actually suggest that they strongly disagree with the proposal. So, in any case, the responses show very clear disagreement by respondents with the proposal to close the residential facilities, with at least 97% disagreeing. Respondents were asked what impact, if any, they thought that the proposal would have on them, their child and or their family. And the majority of respondents, 72%, or 169 respondents, indicated that the proposal would have a very negative impact. And a further 34, that's 14%, indicated that the proposal would have a somewhat negative impact. I'll see if we can bring the next slide up. Is there any way to bring the next slide up while I continue? We did further analysis on the responses to that impact question, looking at the role of the respondents. And as this slide shows, that the majority of those who indicated that the proposal would have no real impact identified themselves as members of the public. Whereas responses from parents or carers of children attending the school, or those who are considering sending their children to the school, show that all but one response indicated that the proposal would have either a very or somewhat negative impact. And all responses from students indicate that the proposal would have either a very or somewhat negative impact. The open text comments in response to the why do you say this follow-up questions to these key questions around agreement and potential impact, and also the open question at the end of the survey, give us a rich picture of why the residential provision is valued by parents, pupils and teachers. Now I would summarise that as follows. The value of the residential provision to improving pupil outcomes. Secondly, the value the overnight stays provide as an opportunity for pupils to develop their social and independence skills and their confidence. And thirdly, the value of the residential provision to improving family life for parents and carers and siblings through the respite provided. And with your permission, I would like to read out some of the comments received through the survey to illustrate those points. The children get a massive benefit from staying in residential with all the extended activities that the school provides. The skills learned in a residential setting away from home develop independence, resilience, confidence, and the ability to cope. This is a necessity to the school and the children it prepares for life. They learn things that cannot be taught in the home easily, like caring for themselves and making simple journeys, such as using the bus. What the children benefit from residence is life skills and the ability to be more independent. Taking this away takes away the time they spend learning to be independent and do things for themselves. We learn lots of life skills and enjoy the educational side of things. We learn how to make beds, iron, work as a team, tie shoelaces, set the dinner table, good manners, etc. Before I did residential, I didn't know how to make my bed, cook simple meals and/or hot drinks. The staff have supported me through some difficult times where it helped to be away from home. And a few with regards to socialising. Residential gives the children the opportunity to develop friendships and have new experiences outside of school hours instead of being isolated, which is the reality for most children with special educational needs, as they all live so far from each other. At home, I can't play out because I find it hard to make friends. I'm stuck in the house all evening. In Resi, I enjoy playing with friends. The impact of closing would be that my son would not be able to socialise with his peers. All of his friends live far away from each other, and as they struggle with leaving their home settings, they would not be able to be together. I had planned for my son to use this facility to improve his social skills and learn how to form friendships without me. I do not know how else this could be achieved. Please don't close residential, as I wouldn't be able to spend time with my friends and learn how to get along with people outside of school. And with regards to respite, for some of the families, it offers a lifeline for parents and other siblings, allowing parents time and a break from the constant demands and behaviour problems. It gives parents and siblings the opportunity for respite from children who often need a lot more support and attention. Closure would affect his family, including the relationships his siblings have with their friends. It's a good opportunity for the siblings to have their friends over. Residential care is not used as a holiday home. It's also there to help the families live a calm, ordinary life for just a day a week. The family will miss the respite they get, and I think this will add even more pressure to the family. Now, the survey also asks what could be done to support families and pupils and reduce any negative impacts. This open question received 220 responses, and the majority, on at 59, reflected the view that the residential provision should be kept open and not closed. There were some specific suggestions referenced amongst the responses as well, including the provision of comparable alternatives, generating income or charging for the provision, and the provision of after-school activities. Again, I'll quote some suggestions here. Provide information to families about other possible activities available for pupils with special educational needs in the local area. Provide residential respite for all pupils at a different site altogether, so they can socialise together, the same as what is being stolen from them. Have the Council looked at a reduction or ways to reduce costs of the service? Have you considered whether parents and or the school are willing to contribute additional sums of money on a regular payment plan? Offer evening social sessions for children to mix with others. Keep it open on a smaller scale. Now we'll hear more about the petition and the e-petition. And we're aware the e-petition in particular has attracted support across the country and indeed the globe, although certainly almost 50% of the signatories of the e-petition live in Leicestershire or Leicester. 1,771 signatories included a comment as part of signing the petition, and we have had a look at those comments, and it's clear that the feedback contained in those comments broadly echoes the feedback received through the consultation survey. The consultation feedback demonstrates a general concern expressed in particular by members of the public through both the survey and the petition that the proposals are unfair and are taking away vital services that support the most vulnerable in society. And many also expressed the expectation that the closure of the residential facility will result in higher costs in other parts of the local authority. I'll just read out a few. Please do not close this service because there is a risk of future mental health issues and lack of independence, which will mean even more money could be spent. It's a false economy. This is going to cost the taxpayer far more than it saves in individual respite, in increases in direct payments, in costs of sheltered living because children haven't achieved independent living, and in benefit payments. I know that budgets are being cut everywhere and finding money is becoming increasingly difficult, but please don't let the weaker members of society suffer. Special needs children already miss out on so much, and this gives them a chance to experience a normal life in a totally secure environment. Austerity will pass, but take this unique and outstanding residential provision away and it's gone forever, along with that chance for our kids to develop better futures. Surely there is a better way to save money than take it from those who were born with so many challenges in just living each day. We need more places like Maplewell Hall. We shouldn't be cutting them. I will stop here and happy to take any questions of clarification.
Many thanks. We have a number of people wishing to speak to the committee this afternoon. We have Mrs. Taylor, the local member, and representatives of parents and teachers from Maplewell School. The committee is interested to hear your views and welcomes your input. However, please can I ask each of you to speak for no more than your allotted time. We have to manage timing of the meeting as we have many other items on the agenda. Anna will be timing your input and I'll ask you to stop after your time has passed. I'd now like to welcome Mrs. Taylor as local member for Bradgate Division to speak. Can I ask you that you speak for no more than 5 minutes? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've spent a large amount of time looking into the proposal to close the residential facility at this school, and I've had the delight of visiting the school last week and having a tour of the facilities and to find out more about what the school offers. In a report by the Director of Children and Family Service on the provision of school places in Leicestershire, it states that there is a long-term trend towards increased demand in special education needs, which has necessitated extending capacity in the area special schools. This council has been allotted £2.1 million capital funding from the Department of Education for the development of SEND provision in Leicestershire for the period till 2020-21. I look forward to some of that money being spent at Maplewell School to further enhance the facilities. I understand that we have limited budgets, we face tough times, we have to make difficult decisions, and we have 3,600 children to consider and all their complex needs. I've tried to find out as much as I can about we care for all our children with special needs. These children are our most vulnerable residents and we should be looking at supporting them more, not less. If we do not support these children to achieve and become independent adults, they will become a drain on the adult social care budget in the future and we will not be making any real savings. In regard to funding, if a child has mild, moderate learning difficulties, they can be supported in mainstream schools. Children with severe learning difficulties are supported in specialist schools. Children with moderate learning difficulties are left in the middle of this and seem to lack the much-needed funding and fall into a bit of a grey area. We are looking today at proposals to reduce funding from this grey area, and this is the wrong decision. I find the reports very lacking in information. I will highlight some of my concerns. The first issue is additional transport costs due to the children not staying for 2 nights per week. I've only received an estimate costing for this additional transport of approximately £5,000, but I suspect this figure will be much higher if it's looked at properly. The second issue is the take-up of residential care. The reports state that each child stays for 12 to 14 nights per year, but this figure is in fact per half term. The residential experience is offered to key stages 3 and 4. The take-up is over 50% for this group. The third issue is the lack of information included in the report about the further revenue costs that may arise to provide any individual support as a consequence of the removal of facilities. Without these figures, you are asking us to vote blindfolded. These costs must be explored before a decision is made. I asked prior to the meeting how the funding of $293,000 for residential facilities is distributed. I've been unable to gain that information at the moment. I get the feeling that there's been limited discussions between the school and LCC, and I would like to see if there is a way forward to still provide residential facilities, possibly with reduced funding. This needs to be fully explored as part of a more open review. Under the Children's and Families Act 2014, Part 3 of the SEND reforms, the local authority has a duty to support the child and his or her parents in order to facilitate the development of the child and help him or her to achieve the best possible education and other outcomes. This is exactly what Maplewell Hall is doing, and if you'd like to read their last Ofsted report completed in September 2016, in all areas of the school it was considered outstanding. The first sentence of the Ofsted report states, "Young people make exceptional progress academically, socially and emotionally because of the residential experience." It is clear throughout the Ofsted report that the residential facilities offered to pupils enhances their learning and produces their excellent results. This shows this school, including the residential facilities, is providing the most excellent care for our vulnerable children. A full service review should be undertaken to determine how we deliver the high needs block budget for all our 3,600 children in the county, not just at Maplewell Hall. There is not a one-size-fits-all, and we should not be looking at providing the same facilities county-wide, but looking at the different options available. Special education is about understanding that all children are different and benefit from different styles of learning, and we should be embracing the uniqueness of Maplewell Hall and building on that and not stripping facilities away. The Education Act 1996 places a statutory duty on the County Council to ensure a sufficient supply of school places with a view to securing diversity of provision and increasing opportunity for parental choice, and exercise its educational function with a view to promoting high standards. I think Maplewell Hall and its residential facilities has a big tick in both of these boxes. In summary, I don't think the huge impact of losing these residential facilities has been looked at, and the budget saving has been the whole focus of these proposals. I would like these proposals dropped and a full review undertaken county-wide on how we deliver for our 3,600 children with learning difficulties. We must keep in mind that one size does not fit all, and embrace the differences each of our special schools bring to the table and offer as much as we can to our special children. I cannot understand how we can propose to close these residential facilities from the school that is providing this county's children with outstanding educational provision. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Taylor. As a member of this committee, you will be able to speak again during the committee's discussion on this issue. I'd now like to welcome Katie Ryan, the lead petitioner, to the meeting, and to invite you to move to the chair. Thank you. You can also obviously present your petition at the same time.
Good afternoon. I'm here on behalf of my autistic daughter and all students at Maplewell Hall School to ask you to stop the proposed closure of the residential facility. The residential facility at Maplewell is not respite for parents to have a break. It is an essential educational resource for our children to learn to socialise and overcome the barriers their disabilities present every single day. The children learn valuable skills including self-care, positive peer interaction, life skills, preparation for adulthood and independence. These skills can only be learnt at Maplewell, as it offers a familiar and safe environment with familiar and trusted people. It's an added bonus for the children. They get to sleep over with their friends. These skills cannot be taught at home, independence especially, to any effective degree. You would not take away a maths department or sports hall. Residential at Maplewell is no different. It is a vital facility. Losing the residential would be just as devastating to our children. The fact that residential is not stated in our children's EHCPs is because it has always been presented to us as a facility the school offers to all students. From a finance perspective, I would urge you to consider the long-term effects on LCC's social care and transport budgets by withdrawing residents. Please do not take away this outstanding facility from our children. It is needed now and will be needed for future children studying at Maplewell. Rather than closing residential, LCC should be showing Maplewell off as a flagship for what can be achieved for special needs children by such a facility, and open more across the county. To close, I would like to point out Maplewell Hall School consistently achieves excellent Ofsted reports, and it is proven that children that use residential gain far more than the children that don't. I urge you to reconsider this proposal, please. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Katie. Would you like to return to the public seating area? Thank you. And I now invite Kirsty North, the Care and Intervention Team Leader at Mapplewell Hall Special School, to join us. And again, I ask you to speak no more than your allotted time. Thank you.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak. Through staying in residence, students have access to experiences that raise their exposure to learning in multiple ways. Learning does not only happen through the structured activities, but through an emphasis on positive behaviour, independence and communication, which runs throughout the evening and morning. The term sleepover has been used in the consultation document. This is both demeaning and ironic. Demeaning as it does no justice to what students achieve, and ironic as it is exactly the sort of social event that parents tell us their children are excluded from due to their special needs. The document also uses the phrase adequate measures of support to be put in place if the closure goes ahead, but also says where appropriate and where required. This concerns me as it does not appear to be a guarantee that our pupils will receive anything in place of the existing provision. Development of the after-school club has been suggested. For some this may work, but given our county-wide catchment, there will be cost, safety and transport implications. The recent DFE review of residential schools recommended that local authorities and CCGs design holistic offers of education, health and care support personalised to each child with special needs. The report says that short breaks can prevent family breakdown and therefore the need for more expensive full-time residential care. It also recognises that these short breaks are very difficult for families to access through current social care provision. If we are looking at our students holistically rather than financially, then there would be no distinction between what is an educational issue and what is a care issue. The residential provision at Mapplewell is already providing this holistic support and should be held up as an example of best practice to other authorities. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just take this opportunity to ask Katie, did you want to present your petition? I did offer it at the start. Oh, it's okay.
Thank you. I've already actually handed in the petition to Jane Moore, but I'd like to clarify that it did contain 11,592 signatures. Majority of those do live in the Leicestershire area. We're extremely thankful to everybody that supported us, and we really do hope that you take it into serious consideration what the people are saying and keep residential open for our children. Thank you.
Thanks. Right, I'd now like to invite members of the committee to discuss the reports given and ask that Jane Moore and Mr Ord, the Cabinet Lead Member, respond to any points raised during the discussion, please. Councillor Welsh was first.
Thanks very much, Chair. I'll keep it fairly brief. I think it's something we could talk about at length, but I'm conscious of what we've got before us today. The first thing that worries me is that when I received the first briefing on this issue, I was led to believe it was more clear-cut than it is, that it was merely a provision that wasn't being used, that a residential facility wasn't required in the statement for the children, and therefore it's something that's sort of almost residual, something that's left over from times past, and we can save money to close it. It's quite clear since then, as we received more information, that the position's very different to that, very different indeed. All of my grandchildren have stayed residentially at Bow Manor, and all of them received great benefit from that. It was very important to them to have that opportunity. Also, they sleep over at friends' houses. They stay away at events in hotels in London with their parents. They have things that we think are important for our grandchildren. And we need to think very carefully about this resource because otherwise there's no such experience for these children. So my view at the moment is that I'm not saying there aren't savings to be made. I'm not saying that I don't think things could be changed, but I think this feels far too rushed. So the first thing about that is that the paper says that the Cabinet will decide on the 24th of November to make the statutory notice. Well, in light of the petition that doesn't go to Council until December, surely now we need to say to Cabinet, defer that. I think there's some more work to be done in understanding the benefits. I was really interested today to read the paper from Kirsty North and just what difference this facility makes, because it's certainly not what I was led to believe earlier. So I think that we should today as a committee recommend some pause in this process. I think I would like to hear at length from the local member who I thought had some great things to say. A different political group, but that doesn't mean I don't recognise somebody who's done some work on this matter, and I'd like to hear more, and I'd like to have time to talk to officers. I don't believe today around this table we can receive the sort of information as county council members that makes us able to support such a decision, and I think we need a pause in the process. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Mr. Sheehan.
Thank you, Chair. I've got some questions for the officers. There's 3 of them, not that many, but I'm going to put them one at a time because I think it's easier to handle that way. Just out of interest, can anyone recall the last time we considered closing a residential facility of this nature?
So, if I may answer that, Chair, the nearest circumstance that we would come to closing residential facilities would have been the circumstances of Birkett House Special School, which closed a small residential provision in the summer term. Now, the difference here, of course, is that Birkett House is actually an academy, so led the process rather than the local authority.
I think the point is that this has survived 7 years of austerity. You know, there must be some reason why we've hung on to it, why we've kept it, and I think we've started to find out now what the reasons are. Can I just ask as well, under an EHCP, how is the need for residential provision assessed? Because we've heard about the benefits such as socialisation, promoting independence, and the respite, which is a need of the family. Do any of these get factored in when looking at residential provision within an EHCP?
Thank you, Chair. The assessment for residential education provision within an EHCP would be undertaken by an educational psychologist, and the need for education residential would often arise from the need for a young child or young person to have education provision delivered over a 24-hour period. It's quite an extensive curriculum. So at the moment we don't have any children with the need for education residential assessed as part of their education, health and care plan, either at Maplewell or at any other part of their education, health and care plan.
I don't think that really addresses my question. It's I suppose I could put it a different way. Why isn't things like socialisation, promoting independence and respite included in this? Is the EHCP only looking at the very basic needs, or does it not look at the wider picture and the longer term consequences of not providing residential provision, for example, which is, I think, the issue here?
No, the education, health and care plan considers a number of areas. Obviously, there are new plans that are aimed at pulling together both education requirements for children, health requirements and care requirements. The assessment for a child to have what we call a short residential break or a short break overnight stay is done as part of a child's either child in need plan or child protection plan. So it's a social care assessment which would assess the needs for a child to have a short period of either respite regularly or over a kind of regular period of time. If that assessed need had taken place as part of their child in need plan, it would then become part of their education, health and care plan. So it would form the care element of the education, health and care plan.
I mean, I do get the impression it is a very narrow assessment and also potentially quite short-sighted, and I'd like to follow on from that by asking officers to comment on the evidence that's been given that closing this facility will result in costs arising elsewhere in the system. Do you accept those assertions, or do you have your own views on that?
I think at the moment, as we've said, because we haven't undertaken an individual assessment of each of the children, we haven't come to a firm conclusion around the funding. We have had an initial look at the additional transport costs, and we think they'll be in the region of around £5,000, as Mrs Taylor has said. We have had a look at all of the children who currently attend Maplewell Hall to see what they have within both their education, health and care plans and their child and care plans, and at the children in need plans, sorry. And at the moment, they don't lead us to be thinking there will be significant additional costs, although we are very clear that should parents request, we would be happy to assess the need of those children who are currently using residential provision.
Yeah, that's all my questions, but I think I'm inclined to agree with Mr Welsh. I think we are acting a little bit hastily here. There seems to be an awful lot of things that we've not considered. We seem to be stumbling around a little bit, and I think if we're not careful, we'll blunder into a very bad decision.
Thank you. Mr Kaufman.
Thank you, Chair. My view has somehow changed since I first read the papers and first heard about this. I thought this was a facility that it was a formality to close because nobody used it and nobody cared, and it just sort of passed its sell-by date. And coming here this afternoon and hearing what I've heard and read what I've read, I come to a different conclusion, and my concern is the quality of scrutiny if we go ahead with anything this afternoon. This council set up a constitution to make it almost impossible for somebody to present a petition to the full county council. It demanded 10,000 signatures. Now I think I'm in my 5th year here, and I don't recall anywhere in the county anybody achieving 10,000 signatures. I know we worked our butts off and got about 5,000-6,000 to stop you switching off to stop the council switching off street lights, and that was all over Oadby. So we know how difficult it is. So we get a petition with 11,000. I wrote it down somewhere. 11,592, which is well over the target that these people needed to get, and we find that the decision is planned to be made before the council meeting is actually held. So if members of the public and the parents here feel that the democratic process is being abused or doesn't really mean anything, I think I would have a lot of sympathy with this. So I think a lot more work has got to go on this, Madam Chair. I've been in a situation where scrutiny on this council has recommended a particular sort of action, and it's gone to Cabinet in the past and gone into Cabinet in about 30 seconds, and they've taken no notice of whatever the Scrutiny Committee is concerned. But this can't happen. This really mustn't happen in this one, because once it's gone, it'll be gone forever. So I do agree with my two colleagues that have spoken. What we've got to do is to slow down this process and make sure we get some proper answers before we take any irrevocable action, because I'd be very unhappy if we whatever decision we made and it went to Cabinet first and then the democratic process of going to the county later, it doesn't work, and people will be very cynical. So I agree with my colleagues. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mrs Page.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm kind of at a loss. I don't seem to have enough information. I know that every story is individual and every story is very emotive, because whatever it is, everybody wants the best for their children. And as councillors, we do have a responsibility all across the sector, and we have got so many cost pressures at the moment and so very little money that it is sometimes almost soul destroying. Even if we want to do things, sometimes we can't. But in order to make this decision, I have got an awful lot of questions, because, and bear with me, first of all, the first question is, everybody is talking about the skills. And I kind of cannot see how the skills, because the school is teaching the skills in the daytime, and I cannot see how a residential, and excuse me for using the term, a sleepover, can add to that full skill environment can add to it. So can you explain to me how that adds to the holistic experience? Secondly, it is in relation to some of the question beforehand, who sets the criteria of that individual child can benefit from a sleepover? Where's that criteria set? Thirdly, we heard earlier on that allegedly none of the children at Mapplewell Hall are assessed to have the need of a residential. Now, if I'm looking in the paper, and can you confirm it, it says that the school currently receives an allocation of £293,000 for the high needs block, yet it says that the school only provides support for moderate need. So how do we get to that situation that we are paying for high need in the first place? Because if we have, as a county council, provided some, how did we get to this position? Now, also, we are talking 69 pupils, it says, that have used this need. So if 69 pupils received £293,000, that is nearly £4,000 per pupil. And if we say, just for argument's sake, are being fair and saying if students benefit, and we are talking 3,600 at £4,000 nearly, we are talking that this council would have to have a budget of nearly 20 million to be fair and extend that service to everywhere else. So I'm kind of, I appreciate that parents and staff are fighting to keep something, but I need to know what the justification is that should be extended to 69 children and one part of the country only. And I really would like to know if you're saying that this £293,000 was spent on sleepovers only. How does that break down? It doesn't make sense. I have also got a responsibility here to justify that money to the rest. So there are an awful lot of questions which I need answering, and maybe the officers can answer me to give me a case to say this is justifiably spent or this isn't. So I'm just trying to get to the bottom of all of this before I even think any further. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take each question as you've asked them. I think in relation to your first question around how the skills or the certainly the after-school provision and sleeping over at the centre add to educational value has never been at question. The after-school provision that's provided by the school has a number of different activities that the children can participate in and provides a whole range of kind of activities that will add value to an educational curriculum and add value to children as well. So I think, and certainly parents and Mrs Taylor and the head of residence have added quite clearly that any kind of after-school provision at any of our mainstream schools, any of our special schools, will add to the curriculum of any school. Sorry, Mrs Page.
Yeah, can you hang on? After school, so this is not, as the lady said earlier, just a sleepover. This is an after-school that starts from when to when. Just elaborate on that before we go any further.
Yes, so just to be clear, the children finish school and go and undertake a range of after-school activities which take the children up to about 7 o'clock, I think I'm looking 7:30 in the evening, and that's the kind of after-school provision where they undertake a whole range of activities. For those children then that are staying on at Maplewell, they have some food and then enter into another kind of set of after tea activities, and then they'll go to bed, so as part of the sleepover provision. So there's a whole raft of activities that are part of the both after-school provision and the residential or sleeping over provision as well. In terms of who sets the criteria around which children can benefit, the school would be best to answer that. It's the school that make the decision or enable the children to access the provision. So they would be better placed to answer the question around the criteria for who can involved. The question you've asked around how do we get to the situation of funding children with moderate learning difficulties through the high needs block, I think that's a summary. We made an allocation of the 293,000 to Maplewell Hall some time ago based on a per pupil ratio of funding. So it's an arrangement that we've had in place with Maplewell Hall for some time. Just to remind you, the high needs block isn't just for children with high needs. It's a block of money that's provided to local authority to support children with education, health and care plans or special educational needs and disabilities. And there's a whole spectrum of young people who are supported through this. I think the really important point is the issue around assessed need. So all children are entitled to support through the high needs block if they have an assessed need, and we ought to be providing provision for those children based on the need at which they're assessed. And again, you've talked about the 69 pupils, which does equate to around about £4,000 per pupil. And there is a need for equity and there is a need for fairness. But again, I go back to my point around assessed need. The assessed need for pupils would identify which provision is suitable for any pupil with an education, health and care plan. So it wouldn't necessarily equate that every child would be entitled to the £4,000 education provision. And then finally, the £293,000 breakdown, that's the pot of money that's allocated to the school to use for the residential provision. So the full breakdown would be available through the school.
If I may come back, Chairman, so it is the 293,000. It's just for the residential. Nothing else. And the other thing was Councillor Taylor mentioned 2.1 million, which has been allocated. So could you elaborate on that 2.1 million as well to give us details of that?
Yes, so the 2.1 million is a capital fund that was given to us over a 3-year period. So it equates to around about £700,000 worth of capital per year that we were given to invest in the development of special educational needs provision across Leicestershire. There has been an allocation from that capital funding made to Maplewell already, as well as allocations to a further 4 schools. So it's a new pot of money over the next 3 years, which is about giving us the opportunity to build more or use more capital funding for special educational needs provision.
And I need to come back one more time. If a decision would be made, because you are just saying that residential is quite beneficial to some of the children, so say if a decision were to be taken to close, would there be how would that slack be picked up? Would there be another place that provides it? Is there enough available to provide that? Are there any implication on a child who probably studies at the daytime at Maplewell and then at night is taken to, I don't know, Bowmanor Hall? So just talk me through that bit as well.
No, I mean, I think one of the really important points to make is that we're not questioning the value or the quality of the provision at Maplewell Hall. This is about assessed need, and what we've said very clearly is that those children that are currently using the residential provision, if the decision is made that the closure will go ahead, we will look at their assessed needs. What we would hope is to be able to also work with the school to look at the after-school provision and the work that they could do after school. I think what parents and carers would tell us, that buying residential provision from somewhere else wouldn't be a suitable replacement. So as you suggest, buying nights at Bow Manor wouldn't necessarily be a suitable replacement. But again, just to go back to assess needs, in order for us to do that, we would need to have undertaken an assessment of need, and we would have had to identify the need for residential educational provision or short break residential provision to be in need of that child in order for us then to provide that facility.
Thanks. Paul Meredith, you'd like to come in?
Just a couple of points. Firstly, on the point that Councillor Sheehan made about the assessment that's undertaken in terms of EHC plans, saying that it wasn't a substantial process. It is a substantial process. It's a process that's required by government. It's a process that's inspected by Ofsted. If parents aren't happy with the outcome of the process, they can appeal to an independent tribunal that can look at actually the arrangements put in place to meet that. So I think Jane has just made the point very well about the difference between residential respite, which is provided in social care, and in terms to be able to access that again would require a comprehensive assessment of an individual's needs under a single assessment framework with social worker, and on the back of that we would then look to provide a service or commission it, but we couldn't provide that service in Maplewell Hall. It's not registered to do that under Ofsted, and it's highly unlikely that that building would ever be in a position to be able to provide that sort of facility. So it's a completely different arrangement that you have to put in place to do that. And it's very important that we do understand that we've made the point in this document that any families who feel that they would meet the criteria for some type of short breaks, respite provision, can ask for an assessment, and we will undertake an assessment of their needs in that way. If any parents are not happy with their EHC plans in the way they're constructed, they can ask for those to be appealed or do whatever they want in that sense. So it is a very robust process that actually goes through this. So just a final point in terms of the scale that what we're talking about here. We've talked about that we've got 3,600 young people and children that we're supporting. That is growing year on year quite significantly at a time when we're already, as the report identifies, significantly overspent on our provision. This resources that we're being given are being ring-fenced by the government and probably capped by the government. And so what we're faced with on a number of these situations is growing demand for services in this area with a budget which is significantly overspent and likely to be capped. And in order to do that, we're having to make some very difficult decisions. And I don't think anybody at any point in any of the briefings that I've given to members was trying to suggest that young people didn't benefit from, in some way or another, from this facility, because I believe they do. The issue that we're faced with is that in those situations we have to make some very difficult decisions about what we can provide and what we can't provide. And the basis of doing that is via a comprehensive and substantial assessment, which is either a social care assessment or an EHC plan. And that has to be the basis on which we do that, linked to clear eligibility criteria. So I just wanted to reinforce that point.
I don't think I said that the criteria were not substantial. I think what I said was that they are narrow and short-sighted, because they seem to be increasing dependency, stressing out families and devaluing socialisation. They were the points I made. It's a criticism of the process overall. It doesn't look at the whole person and the whole circumstances in which they have to deal with the real world and get their education sorted out.
I think the term in itself, education, health and care, looks at all the different elements that would actually apply. So you've got health professionals are putting an input into the process. You've got educationalists that are looking at the education side of the process, and then you've got social care professionals that are actually looking at the social care impact of that. And within that, within the plan that is brought together, to provide what should be a holistic package, either in terms of educational facilities or, if necessary, in social care facilities. And that's the idea. So the whole point is that they do look at all the different aspects of young people's needs, and as appropriate, families' needs.
Thank you, Paul. I'd just like clarification that if the decision was made to close the residential area, there would still be facility to have extended school provision where the children could still benefit from meeting with each other and doing activities. It's just the fact that they would end up going home at the end of the day rather than staying at school. Is that right?
Yes, obviously that's ultimately a matter for the school, but there's no reason that that couldn't continue to operate in some way, and I'm sure we'd be very supportive of working with the school to see if there's some ways that we could ensure that those sort of facilities continue to operate.
Thank you, Paul. Would we also perhaps be able to help with transport, etc.? I mean, that's a big thing with school budget.
Yes, I think that's an option. The school, I understand, has got its own transport as well. They've got minibuses, so in some way, I'm sure that that could be an arrangement that could be put into place.
I just want to feedback some information first before I take a couple more. The Cabinet decision would not be implemented, Mr. Kaufman, until the Council had considered the matter. So just so that you're aware that if any decision was made, it can't be implemented until it goes to the full Council. And it is an executive decision, so it can't be made by individual committees, only by the Cabinet. So just so that you're aware of the way things are dealt with, okay?
Doesn't make me happy.
No, but I'm just feeding back the way it's working. Mrs. Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point of clarity that the £5,000 figure that I quoted was the estimate I was given for transport costs and not for the additional funding and support that may, as a consequence of the removal of the facilities. So just a point of clarity on that. I've got 3 questions. I'll ask them one at a time if it's easier for officers to answer. So do we send any children to the new state-of-the-art school at Wigston? Do we pay for any children to go there with their hydrotherapy pool there?
Yes, the Burkitt House school that the new school that we've just built there is one of our area special schools. So yes, we have a number of children there from Leicestershire at that special school.
So we fund them to go there, so they have the facilities of the hydrotherapy pool that the pupils at Mapplewell Hall don't. So I'm just trying to get the point across that each special school is different and they all have different facilities, and that's what I'm trying to get across, that each children with different needs has different facilities and the options of that.
Yes, we've got a range of special schools across Leicestershire, of which Burkitt House is another. We've got 6 area special schools. Each of the area special schools is set up with, as you say, different facilities. The area special school that you've referred to, Burkitt House, primarily caters for children with much more severe special educational needs and disabilities. But you're absolutely right, as you point out, different special schools have different provision for different pupils based on assessed need.
Thank you. My second question is, do we know exactly how much it costs for the school to provide the residential experience there?
The position is that we make a payment to the school. This is a system, as you understand, that's been set up for some time generally with schools, with devolved financial management. The sum that the 293,000 is based on a formula basis on terms of headage, so it's a payment per young person that's going to use that facility over the period of time. That's how it's calculated. That money is then paid to the school on that formula basis, and then the school uses that funding as it sees fit to run certain facilities, and that's that applies across the piece with other finance that we provide. That there's a lot of autonomy to schools about how they could use the funding to provide various facilities.
So I'm just thinking, if some work is done with the school, is there any work that's done so far to look at reducing the funding, maybe, for the school to still be able to offer that residential experience? Has any of that been done prior to these proposals coming forward?
We haven't done any work with the school in terms of this time to look at if there's some way that we could reduce costs and things like that. No.
Something I'd put forward, but there are, I think, members of the committee have picked up that there are a lot of unanswered questions. There is a lot more work to do with this before we get anywhere near putting a proposal together. And I would like it minuted that I'm against this proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Mrs. Page.
Yes. Another question of clarification. Previous in the discussion, there was a reference to after-school work to be funded by the local authorities and the CCG. Did I hear correct? No, I didn't hear correct, because somebody mentioned the CCG. No, because if the CCG or any other authority has a funding or a responsibility, are there, and that is a question coming back to Councillor Taylor's, things that we could explore, that there are other funding streams, or is that not possible? Or could the school explore other outside funding streams?
So I doubt very much whether CCG would be in a position to fund that. Clearly their expenditure relates to health provision, and I don't think in any way anybody's suggesting that there's a health element to this. In terms of the school generating other funding to run that, yes, that's a possibility, as I understand it, that they might be able to find other ways to fund it, I suppose. Yeah.
Mr. Bremner.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at the proposals for the report, and the committee is to note proposals for closure. However, I think this committee has already spoken about a number of concerns that the Cabinet can look at. My own concerns are about the funding, and I'm concerned in paragraph 18 of these costs have yet to be quantified. So I think we have little gaps that the committee is unable to really scrutinise. I also would like to leave a flavour for you in terms of a quote from Katie Ryan when she spoke. And she used the phrase familiar environment. And I think it's a small phrase, but for the children, particularly children with special needs, it's a really key element of their grounding that can then lead to independence. And I think we have to be very careful when we talk about funding streams for individual. I know we're assessing children individually, but if we break them down into an individual and we fraction out and break up that familiarity for them, it takes them backwards rather than forwards. So I think in all your discussions you have to balance all these needs together, and it's not easy. But I would ask for the comments from this committee to go to the Cabinet, and they can make their decision. I realise that the Cabinet, some of us around this table have sat in cabinets at lower levels of tiers of government. They know the difficulty of making decisions, and I think upon that, I think you cannot make a decision or a proper scrutiny if you don't have a proper understanding of the cost quantified, because there's going to be a cost implication when you assess the needs individually and give support to children individually, whereas at the moment they're all in one place. So it's a balance of funding, and the Cabinet will have to weigh that in the balance.
Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Chair. One of the questions I've been trying to work out, I'm not very good in a calculator. How much are we talking about per night, per pupil? We talk about formula funding, and we give a lump sum, and it's up to the school to decide how to spend it. And somewhere along the line, one minute I'm getting the impression that it seems an awful lot of money per pupil per night. But if I was running a business, I suppose Bow Manor would come along and say, well, to have your pupils with staff and whatever it is, it would cost so much a pupil night. I wonder if we could, or the school perhaps can help, or somebody can help and tell us what sort of figure we're talking about. And the other point is, I think the type of pupils that would go to that school would feel safer rather than going out to an outside place that they don't know about. I think that's a very point I think the school are trying to make. It's the comfort and security of where they go for the day school rather than whatever anybody else outside the premises was going to do. I have to say, not all councils have cabinets, and some of them leave it up to the democratic committee structure to decide what's going to happen, but I thought I'd make that point. But Chair, I don't think the cabinet, if they're getting the same information as we're getting, I don't think the cabinet is anywhere near able to discuss and come to a conclusion. And I think what we ought to be saying to the cabinet is, from the information currently available, you can't make any decision, and let's go back and do some more research. Thank you.
Mrs. Page.
I think it's about £280 per night, Councillor Kaufman, because if there are 39 pupils, 14 nights stay, so that works out. But the committee clerks have noted that all of the questions, and I do agree to a certain extent that there is an awful lot of information needed and questions outstanding. Now, whilst I appreciate we cannot change the administrative process, and we are only noting the report and asking the questions, I am very much with Paul and Councillor Kaufman to say, in a way, can we ask the Cabinet or to pass on that more information is provided to the Cabinet on quantified cost, etc., and the breakdown and the questions we have asked. So all of this information is presented to the Cabinet so they get a fuller picture than we have in front of us now.
I think there have been notes being taken of all the comments today, and I think they will get. Cabinet will understand the concerns we have today. Mr. Sheehan.
I don't think we have to accept this recommendation if it is a recommendation, to note this report. I think we can take it a bit further in line with what people seem to be calling for here. And I think we can say as a scrutiny committee that we urge that the Cabinet defers a decision on this closure proposal pending a more thorough evaluation and assessment. I'll be more than happy to move that if it's seconded.
I'm certainly aren't happy with that, Chairman.
Sorry, I was in discussion with somebody, with the clerk. Could you repeat that for me, Mr. Sheehan?
Yes, recommend to the Cabinet that they defer consideration of this proposed closure pending a more thorough evaluation and assessment along the lines of the concerns that we've raised today.
Is there a seconder?
Yeah, I'd be happy to second it. I actually don't know. If I was asked today, should we close it or not, I've no idea. I've not received the information I could even begin to make that. So I couldn't support anything that went to Cabinet to say one view or the other. What I'm sure of is that there's not enough information in the papers we're receiving, and in fact there are enormous gaps. And some of the Dr. Bremner's point about those fine judgments over where benefit comes and alternative benefit certainly haven't been addressed at all. I also think that if that work was done, it should come back again once to this committee before then we make our observations to Cabinet. So I'm more than happy to second that recommendation.
Mrs. Page?
With all due respect, that is not how the process works. The process works that scrutiny teases out and searches for the questions, then that goes to, we are not a decision-making body, and the administrative process is set. It is up to the Cabinet on the basis of our recommendations to make a decision. However, as the chairman pointed out, they are not making the decision. It will go still to full council, and that is where you can argue, and all of the council can argue, not just a few. And no, I can't support. I can support the search for additional information. I can support that quantified cost, and all of the details are laid out to the Cabinet and for them to take it from there. But I cannot support that there is a delay put forward, because we are then totally not following the administrative process, and that is, as a scrutiny committee, we can't make that decision.
I will reiterate that we are not here to make a decision. We are here to pass our comments to Cabinet on what we've received in the report. And the summary of the key points I have here is to recognise the benefits of the residential provision at Mapplewell and value the quality, and that quality is not in question, that little has been done to understand, and if a small offer could be made at reduced cost, and there's uncertainty on costs and alternatives available. And I think that if that's strongly worded to Cabinet, I think they would understand the views of the committee. But as we have a proposal, I have to take a vote. So can I have all those in favour of Mr Sheehan's proposal of a deferral? All those against? That's carried, thank you.
One more point: members can make a representation in writing and verbal to the Cabinet as well, and so can members to the public, if you might want to reiterate that to enhance whatever was said.
Can I just reiterate that was not approved? Mr. Rhodes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you members for the discussion that you've had, and also for the presentation that we had from staff and parents of Maplewell Hall School. I will take back, in addition to your written comments, the flavour of the meeting that I've listened to. In terms of some of the additional information that's been very correctly identified here, I have asked for a special audit to be carried out of the school. I want to know where the £293,000 is going. In particular, I want to know why I have emails that tell me that some parents are asked to make an additional contribution of £9 to £15 a night, according to issues that have been raised with me elsewhere. I also think that, having listened to the debate, the issue of current outcomes has now got to be considered. I would like to know how many of the children currently in the school leave and then go on to adult social care. And I don't have that information at present. But if it were to be the case that none do, then I think Mrs. Taylor's view is considerably enhanced. And if it were to be the case that a majority of the young people currently at the school, including residential provision, still require further help when they leave the school, then that puts a very different picture on. As far as the Cabinet meeting is concerned, Cabinet is not closing the school at that meeting. It may well take a decision to formally consult on closure, which is quite a different thing. A formal consultation following the informal consultation that's taken place at the moment requires due process. And until that process is completed, there will not be a decision made to close the residential setting at Mapplewell School. But that doesn't mean that Cabinet isn't able to make that decision when it meets in 2 weeks' time. And just for the members of this committee, normally, as you well know, I get lobbied extensively. I have had one parent contact me about who has a child at the school, and my answer to her was unequivocal. You have an education, care and health assessment. It has to be reviewed annually, and if you are dissatisfied with the outcome of that, you have the right to appeal to an independent tribunal whose ruling is binding on the council. And I think I would finish my comments on that note, Chair. Thank you.
The committee's comments will be submitted to the Cabinet meeting on the 24th of November 2017. I'd like to thank you all for attending this meeting. You're welcome to stay for the remainder of the meeting or to leave. It's entirely up to you. Thank you. Moving on to item 11, early support and inclusion for children with special education needs and disabilities, which is on page 19 to 28 in your agenda pack. Paul Meredith, Director of Children and Families, and Jane Moore, Assistant Director, Education and Early Help, will present the report and answer questions. Thank you.
Again, Chair, this is Jane's going to lead off on this one.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to advise the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Commission of the current position with early support and inclusion contract within the department, as with Memphis, but also to note the plan for the delivery of these services post-December 2017. Paragraphs 2 to 4 outline the policy framework for children and young people with disabilities. At its meeting on the 15th of September, the Cabinet did consider an urgent item report from the Director concerning the Council's current position in relation to early support and inclusion, and in particular the contract that the Department had with Memphis and the plans for the delivery of the services post-December 2017. The report was urgent because some issues had arisen after the agenda to Cabinet had been published. But at the meeting, Cabinet did resolve that the delivery of early support and inclusion services on the basis of in-house provision be approved, and that Memphis be advised that the Council's contract and procurement rules don't allow for further extension. So by way of background, the Children and Families Department does provide a range of services to children with disabilities and their families, and that does include the commissioning of early support and inclusion. The County Council's commissioned early support and inclusion services from Memphis since 2003. However, in October 2016, we did develop a new specification for the tender of this provision to be delivered from April 2017. The specification was revised, and it was revised due to the removal of one element of the provision, which was around the brokerage of our summer play schemes. So the new contract value was set at $170,000. And I've detailed in paragraphs 9 the aim of the specification that was put out to tender. The procurement process closed in December last year, and Memphis was the only provider to apply for the contract. However, the bid was accompanied by a letter from Memphis that stated that, in their opinion, they were unable to provide the service set out in the delivery for the budget outlined in the invitation to tender. And as a result of this, it wasn't possible for us, therefore, to award the contract. So in order to ensure that there was no gap in provision for children with disabilities and their families, it was agreed to extend the contract with Memphis that was due to expire at the end of March 2017 to the end of December 2017. And during this period, it was agreed that a full review of the service and needs be undertaken in order to determine the future commissioning and delivery arrangements of those services. So we did undertake a service review, some of which we've detailed from paragraph 12 onwards, and that review looked at where referrals for the current Memphis provision had came from, but also had a look at what we were already delivering in-house in the department that was supporting the delivery of these services. As part of this review, we agreed that we would change our referral route for children and young people with special educational needs to create a single route through our Early Help Hub. From paragraph 17 onwards, I've outlined our proposals for our in-house provision of the early support and inclusion work. So over the last year, the Children and Families Department have been strengthening their response to delivery of early help services for children with special educational needs and disabilities. And as a result of that, we are confident in the department that we're able to deliver the necessary services in the revised specification in-house alongside services that are already delivered within the department. And not only does this option make better use of effective resources, but it also aligns what we're currently delivering with the work that we'll be bringing in-house from January. We are doing some work to develop our Early Help Hub, which allows for provision of information, advice and guidance to families, as well as access to some of the more specialist short break services, information about universal and targeted play and leisure services. And for those families that do require additional support, we will be offering them an early help assessment in order to identify what their needs are, in order to define whether they require some group work or one-to-one support as part of that. So in paragraph 19, we have outlined how we intend to deliver the services set out in the specification. We're currently working with Health around looking at how we support children with more complex needs as well. We have given notice to Memphis in respect to the current contract, and this will end on the 31st of December 2017. In July, Memphis wrote to Mr Old in his capacity as lead member with a request for us to make a further extension of the contract and to go back out to retender the provision. The letter did indicate that if we were to go back out and retender, they would now be able to submit a compliant bid. We are not able to, we were unable and remain unable to agree any further extension to the contract, and we were very clear with Memphis that we would now be delivering the services in-house. Memphis, as you are aware, has subsequently raised concerns with yourselves, with MPs and with a number of other people about their concerns about our delivery. Just to conclude, we have sought legal advice and are working with Memphis around TUPE implications of the decision. However, just to conclude, the department is confident that the proposals that we've put forward to deliver early help, early support and inclusion services will be robust and enable the department to deliver good services to those children with special educational needs and disabilities in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr Sheehan.
Yeah, can we just start with a bit of clarification on what exactly we're in breach of if we were to extend the contract? I'm not suggesting we should, I'm just saying what the contract rules say on this.
The contract procedure rules allowed us to extend the contract once, but for us to continue to do that would be in breach of the rules that were in that contract.
I'm struggling to see what we're scrutinising here because it seems to be pretty much a fait accompli with this. It would have been perhaps helpful if we'd got hold of it a bit earlier, but at the same time there's been such a heated correspondence going on. I don't know what we can do to get involved. I'm not even sure we should really.
Mrs Page.
Thank you, Chairman. You can't blame a girl for trying, and you can't blame Memphis for trying. However, I am sure that our officers have done everything to put a robust offer together, and I kind of very much trust into the officers' ability, because having spent a few years in adult social care, I know how committed our officers are to do the best for our residents within the resource envelope they've got. And I am really like Sean here, I don't know what we are scrutinising. We can't go back. We are where we're at. I wish our in-house service the best of luck to deliver this contract. And all I can say is I'm sorry, Memphis. Good luck to our officers, and I note this report.
Mr Welsh.
I accept that we've moved past the period. I still am confused at the speed of it. I'm confused why it didn't come before scrutiny, which would have seen a more normal thing, but I accept we're past that. The bit I am interested in, maybe it is just worth teasing out a little today, is the nature of the provision that we will replace Memphis with. Because it's clear that it's not like for like, so we're not going to do what Memphis did before. So it's perhaps worth just teasing out our understanding a little of what that will be. And I'd like to focus on paragraph or section 13, where it talks about the nature of the referrals that come in. I think it makes eminent sense that we route them all through county. That we should have been doing that before. Heaven knows why we let Memphis effectively just pick up what they wanted, but that's where we were. The problem we've got now is understanding the nature of the offer that parents will receive, because it talks about 92% of the referrals went directly to Memphis, and with the benefits or the financial advice, information about play, leisure, short breaks, all useful things for those parents. And my worry is, what are we anticipating will happen? Because if 100% of the inquiries now come to us, what are we going to do about them? So if a family who have just realised their baby or whatever, their youngster has got disabilities, they will be worried about that and they'll want to talk to somebody. Now, in the past, we know that they would have gone to Memphis, but we have to remember that if we take this contract away, Memphis probably won't be there offering this service. So will we deal with financial advice and concerns that they have?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, you're right. The provision, some of the provision will be very similar. Some will be different and build on what we've already got within our early help services. Just to give you some numbers, there are 385 families open to Memphis at the moment, and we've written to all families to let them know of the change. And as part of that letter, we did offer them the opportunity to ring us to have a conversation, and we've had very few families contact us so far. The offer to families will be a range of offers. Yes, we will still be offering the financial advice. We already have a service that offers information, advice and guidance to families of children with special educational needs, and we think it's really important that we continue to provide that very first guidance to families. So yes, we will be offering the information guidance around things like benefits, financial advice, information on play and leisure activities, all of those things. The other bit that we will be offering is should the needs of those families be a little bit more complex than advice over the phone or a conversation, we will be offering them an early help assessment that will look at a range of needs in order to identify whether they would benefit from accessing group provision or whether in fact they would benefit from having some one-to-one support. So the in-house services will be able to offer a range of provision and sit very neatly alongside our early help offer, which already offers that kind of range of provision based on both a group work and one-to-one offer as well. So we have written to parents. We've done a lot of thinking around the communications plan with Memphis, and we're working with Memphis around looking at the families that they're currently working with in order to identify who would still require support post 31st of December as well.
Mr. Walsh.
I'm much comforted by that response. I think in terms of the Scrutiny Committee, what might be worthwhile considering is a report maybe 6-9 months down the line, just to see how it's gone, particularly if, to protect the Council, if publicity continues to fly around the media, so that we can say that we're monitoring the situation.
I quite agree with that. Mrs. Seaton.
Thank you. I quite agree. Looking at 92% might make you concerned about how we're going to handle that, but it's, without the aid of a calculator here, I've sort of roughly worked out that's 230. This is 92% of the referrals. So it probably would have been helpful to have had figures there as well as percentages. I'm concerned with going back to the one of the correspondence we had from Memphis regarding this, and I've lost it now, is the comment on reduced and poorer services. and I would like to ask what guarantees that we have that we are not going to offer a reduced and poorer service.
I think, as I've outlined to Mr Welsh, we're very two things. First of all, the department remains committed to providing high quality services to all the children that it assesses as requiring support. And we do a lot of work around looking at the not only quality of what we deliver, but whether or not it's meeting assessed needs as well. So we don't think there will be a reduced and poorer support. We actually think that what we'll be able to offer will be enhanced by what we already deliver within the service. Memphis's concerns were that they are, quite rightly, experts in delivering the services they currently deliver. But actually we have a lot of expertise within the department for working with children with disabilities and special educational needs. And we have a lot of expertise within the department around assessing needs, certainly in early help stage as well. So we're really confident that the services won't be reduced and they certainly won't be of poorer quality.
Thank you.
Mr Olds.
Thank you, Chair. Seldom that you have a copy of a letter that I think mentions me on no fewer than 5 separate occasions. So I thought I ought to maybe acquaint you with the fact that I did have a meeting with Mr Knight and a colleague of his who used to also work for Leicestershire County Council. Subsequent to that, Paul had a meeting with Mr Knight. The feedback was everything was okay. I passed that on to SCG, only to find a week later that another letter came out. But I would just like to point out one thing in the copy that you've got. I believe that these complaints will escalate in the coming months. Not my words. They are in the 3rd paragraph from the end. I did not receive a single complaint. You've heard me say this before. I make no apology for saying it again. I'm not interested in belief. I'm interested in hard fact.
Thank you. Mrs Page.
Only in relation to Councillor Seaton's comments, can officers please take it on board in future to maybe give us figures in reports as well as percentages, because figures are far more realistic than 80% and whatever. Jane, with this, and I know you just said you've written to all people, but if a new family comes along, now have we got it all as part of Contact First Plus on the website? So because, as it was said earlier, clients, or whatever you would call them, would probably go, we'll go to Memphis. So then where do they go to? Who gives them the advice? And I know our Contact First Plus is really good, and our customer service, and they do get trained and briefed. But have you got all of that in place, and how are you going to advocate that?
Yes, thank you. Yes, that's a good question, because we've written to all of the current parents. So we've written to all parents who are currently receiving provision from Memphis. But of course, there'll be parents who aren't currently receiving support from Memphis. So 2 things really. One is that we've got a really robust communications plan that we've developed with alongside Memphis, really, which is about not only raising awareness of the new service, but making sure parents know where they need to contact as well. And we trust that Memphis would also pass information on to parents adequately should parents come to them and it's not the service they're providing. But certainly in terms of our kind of communication strategy, we would be ensuring that our first response colleagues are aware, those people that access the Early Help Hub would be aware, and the information on our website is clear as well.
Thank you. Excuse me. Is it possible to arrange for a report to come back in 6 months or so we can keep an eye on things? That would be great. I think otherwise we just note that report, and thank you very much to the officers. Moving on to item 12, Children's Social Care Recruitment and Retention Strategy, which is on page 29 and 32 of your agenda pack. And again, Paul, and Paul's going to present this report with Sharon Cook. Assistant Director, Children's Social Care. Thank you.
Thank you. It's Andrea Denham
Yes.
actually going to do the talking from our HR colleague. Just to set the scene, remember we've talked on a number of occasions in this meeting about some financial pressures in staffing, particularly around the use of agency workers and increasing use of agency workers. And so that's why we asked for this particular item to be brought to advise you early days of the kind of preliminary work that we're undertaking in terms of pulling together a recruitment and retention strategy. So Andrea will go through the details with you.
Yes.
Because Paul's done that introduction, the question is just on that. Would it be possible for Paul to give us a flavour again, remind us of the sort of the sum involved in us having to use agency staff and not retaining staff, just so we get a flavour of the impact of this?
Okay, as we were in the Star Chamber this morning, we were talking about this. I do have some figures. So, from remembering that report that we discussed this morning, I think we're talking about £1.6 million worth of pressures in this area, and we have about 43 agency workers present, which equates to about 11.5% of the children's social care workforce. Okay, so that's the scale. It is significant. Andrea.
Thank you. In terms of the policy framework, all of the actions that are currently in consideration of the draft of the strategy can all be implemented within current policy. However, there are possibilities that we may look at future recommendations. There are other areas that other councils are considering, retention, recruitment payments. Our current pay policy doesn't have provision for those things at the moment. So if those are things that we want to look at in the future, we will need to consider a change to our pay policy for background. Within the paper, I've set out a BBC article, which you may have taken the opportunity to have a look at, from April 2016, which highlighted the national issues with children's social worker recruitment. And it talks about 20% of social work vacancies within England, and more than a quarter of those with less than 2 years' experience leaving social work posts. So this isn't something that is just an experience for Leicestershire with social workers. This is something that's across English councils. In developing the strategy, we've looked at a variety of data which is within the report. So our own HR data, we've done salary benchmarking with other county councils and city councils within the East Midlands region. We've looked at our recent staff survey results, our agency usage, our starter and leaver information. Obviously, Paul's talked about our intentions in terms of tackling our agency spend, but also we've had some challenges in terms of recruitment, needing to re-advertise posts, and also we need to make sure that we're adequately staffed to meet our Ofsted requirements, which I understand is later on the agenda. In terms of the areas that we've found, the strengths that we've highlighted from the research that we've done is at the service level, there haven't been any significant increases in turnover. The percentage of headcount of our experienced social workers has increased at the headcount, and our level of turnover for team managers and independent review officers has been quite low. But there are a number of areas which we do need to focus on and address within the strategy, and I'll talk you through what those are. So, an increasing number of our senior practitioners are choosing to leave the council. We've got a high level of turnover at our level 3 experienced social worker and senior practitioners. When we've done our salary benchmarking for the East Midlands, the salary level for the level 3, so the top of our social work grade, senior practitioner, independent review officer and team manager has started to fall behind the market median within our area. We have a high number of team manager vacancies, and we have generally a low level of interest for those vacancies when we advertise them. Across all of these different jobs, we regularly have to re-advertise. We've started to lose candidates at the offer stage, so they'll have come to us, applied, but when we've come to offer them a job, they've either been offered a retention payment where they are, or they've been offered a salary which is higher than what we have to offer at the council. Current levels of agency usage, obviously that's something that you're aware of, particularly high across first response, strengthening families and child protection teams. We need to look at our professional development support, the offer that other councils are able to show to new recruits is something that we need to work towards. The role for our independent review officers needs to be reviewed. And also when we've looked at our staff survey results, there are some areas that we need to consider in terms of job satisfaction, work-life balance. The recommendations that we currently have under consideration are looking at potentially market premiums for certain posts within those groups that I've talked about, improvements in our recruitment marketing approach, collection and review of our recruitment and retention data, looking at alternatives to agency social work usage, having allocated time for continued professional development, which is outside of the core working time, targeted actions to address the specific issues that have come out of the staff survey, and a review of our assessed and supported year in employment, which is the development programme for our newly qualified social workers in their first year of practice with us. And we're also looking to use the apprenticeship levy to support the development of social work apprentices. So we have a number of people that work in unqualified roles and looking to whether or not that would be something that they would want to develop their careers as social workers. So there are all areas that are on the table for consideration as part of the development of this strategy and to address the issues that we've raised. So a draft of the strategy will be completed and agreed with the departmental management team for children and family services, and then that will be updated to this committee.
Okay, thank you. Can I just ask a couple of questions before I throw it out? You mentioned about we're behind the market median. Roughly, what's the gap? What sort of figures are we talking about?
It's different at different grades. The higher up the salary scale, the greater. I think the largest gap is approximately around the £3,000 mark, and that drops as you go down the tiers. There are some grades of staff where we are at the market median, but there are just some that stand out.
And you also mention in your strengths that the percentage headcount of experienced level 3 social workers has increased, but we're saying the turnover is high on the level 3. Is that because they're gaining promotion and then moving on, or is that because of the situation in hand?
If I can answer that, Chair, it's a bit of both, really. We've got a number of our senior practitioners who have been very successful in moving into team manager posts in recent months, and that's a real positive for Leicestershire. But we do, amongst that group of staff, that tends to be the group that are being offered increased incentives from other authorities to move, not just from local authorities, but from agencies like CAFCAS.
Thank you. Mrs. Page.
Thank you. In all of the questions, you seem to know the cause. But, why? Have we identified to everything why this is and then address that? The issue is, if you have a strategy, to me, it's got to be the right strategy, and I'm not quite sure because I don't have enough details. But I think whenever you find a problem, you have to ask why and then really deeply delve into that. And I'm sure I'm teaching Granny to suck eggs, but there is also, to me, an issue is if you are looking at agency staff, you're normally talking that they cost more than, giving staff the right amount of money and incentives in the first place. And I wonder if an evaluation has been done so to look at the wage structures later on. But 2 points which didn't come out when you just were racing to it. For me, if I were to do a strategy, flexibility would be included. And what I mean is, and I might be sexist here, but most of the social workers I know are females. They have a family, they have other pressures. So job share and, that is, I said to me, and the ones I know, it may be different, but the ones I know, as I said, are female, they have other pressures. So I think something, or even men have got pressures at that, but flexibility to do a job share or whatever, so they can only do so much and to fit it around the family and their other commitments. And the other point I would consider is a lot of they recruit straight from schools and then they pay people for the training and whatever, and in return they commit themselves to a long-term contract with training, or they can go to the university. Has something like that been considered as well? So just talk me through that because it didn't come out.
Madam Chair, if I can answer those questions. All the things you're saying about when we've looked at drafting the strategy have been taken into account. So we've consulted our staff, we've looked at national and our staff survey. We've also looked at national surveys that have been done by the British Association of Social Work that have looked at the things that are important to social workers and make them stay in posts. Funding, salary is obviously important to everybody, but so is the working environment, so is the support they get, the training they get, their opportunities to be able to progress professionally, the caseload size, and the support and environment in which they work. So they are all things that we are taking account of in our strategy. In relation to the workforce and flexibility, the council has a policy of flexible working. Within children's social care, that policy is adhered to, so staff can apply and do apply to be part-time. We do have a number of working parents who work part-time hours, so we would always balance that and the needs of the individual workers with the needs of the service and the service that we need to deliver.
And about recruiting out of school, university, and training them.
We don't recruit out of school, but the apprenticeship scheme that Andrea has referenced in the report is something that we're looking at. So we do have a number of team managers within the county who actually came to the county, worked as unqualified staff and worked through and were supported by the county a number of years ago to complete their professional qualification. And experience does show very clearly that if you've staff that their qualities and capabilities and commitment that you can then support through training, they are staff that tend to stay with the authority beyond the period of time that you would tie somebody into for paying for their qualification. That is something that the authority has not done for a number of years. But we are looking at that with our colleagues in adult services about how we can link to universities about the modern apprenticeship scheme. So that would enable us to identify and then support. It would be a small number going through the years, but each year support a small number of staff who could do the qualification. What we need to do is have a strategy that has a number of elements to it, because it takes time to support those people through the training, and whilst we're supporting those people through the training, we need to do the other things and the other elements of the strategy to enable us to retain our experience and grow our experienced workforce.
Thank you. Mr. Olds, you wanted to come in?
Thank you, Chair. To me. Thank you, Paul. I do try and get away with it if I can. This, to me, is the most important paper Scrutiny have got in front of them today. And the final paper that you've got, the Ofsted report, is almost dependent upon how good we can make this situation. I am particularly concerned about the fourth bullet point in paragraph 8, high number of team manager vacancies and poor interest in current advertised posts. It gives me a really uncomfortable feeling, because the first fact that hit me in the face when I went on the improvement board for Birmingham City Council in October 2010 and visited my first social care office in Castle Bromwich, 2/3 of the people who I met there were agency workers. There wasn't one team manager in the centre who was a Birmingham City manager. They were all standing in. And after 2 years and 2 months, when Gareth left and Leslie came in as the interim, I resigned from that particular board. But I am absolutely convinced that the quality of the team manager makes the quality of the people who are working with them and for them, particularly out in the district offices. I'm also bothered about job satisfaction and work-life balance. Very bothered. As an ex-teacher, job satisfaction kept me going when I could compare my salary to the private sector and could have got more going out into the private sector. But job satisfaction was really important to me. Sharon needs to be really praised for a whole series of visits that she's organised out into the field. We were across at Bassett Street in Wixton 2 weeks ago, Colville before that, with Paul, with myself, going out and meeting workers face to face, listening to them, and I'm quite convinced that our senior managers in the department at the moment are doing everything they can to address this. And then I have to put it into the financial context. We are the lowest funded, top-tier authority in England. Coventry pays £7,000 a year more for a social worker. We're always being told that Northamptonshire is going to become bankrupt, 4,500. And against that market, when you've got bills to pay, job satisfaction can sometimes not be the determining factor. But I do know that what our top team are doing is something that I would support as much as I possibly could do. But this paper is critically important to the future of the department, and if we drop on this, there is no way we'll deliver on Ofsted.
Thank you, Mr. Kaufman. Okay, thank you. Mr. Welsh.
Yeah, I'm just about there. I think it's really to endorse that where we've drifted with the theme. There's nothing wrong at all with those bullet points for the strategy, but they're very much the hard bits. I think there's a softer side that must go along with that. I'm very aware, after work we've done, I mentioned all the authority in Blaby District, we know that the salaries paid there are lower than all the surrounding areas. And a lot of work was done, well, why aren't we losing people? It was a reverse bit of work. And valuing those soft items of workplace experience are really critical. So if we have to put so much work into recruiting people, when we've got them, we really mustn't lose them. We've got to hang on to them. And But the soft things at Blaby, I'm not suggesting these are them, but whether it's a bake-off day and they're doing cakes, whether it's the quiz night they do, the social events that are wrapped into the fabric of the organisation, we've got to just make sure that the strategy is carrying that side along. And I think Ivan's point that he knew that there were others earning more, but he carried on. We've got to make sure we've got that rooted in the practice. I'm appalled at the press that social workers get. There isn't a death of a child mentioned before within 30 seconds some ignorant reporter, and I'll say that on the webcast, ignorant reporter is calling for blaming the social workers as though they killed the child. It's appalling. Who would recommend to their child trained to be a social worker with those pressures? So we've got to do everything we can to support our staff.
Thank you. Mrs Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Most of my questions have already been answered as well. But just around the budgets, is there any budget implications of putting this strategy in place? Has any work been done within that, please?
Yeah, we've been doing some financial profiling around this. We currently pay, it costs us about £15,000 a year more per agency worker, so we wouldn't need to be able to reduce the agency workers with qualified staff. Would give us a significant amount to actually cover a lot of the costs of what we're proposing.
If I could just add something to that, is that I think Ivan's made a very good point, as always, of course, and
down with faint praise.
And but we're not in a position to start throwing money at this. In a sense, yeah, we have got some financial pressures, and what we've got to do is a balanced approach. So I think what Mr. Councillor Walsh has said is absolutely right. You know, a lot of authorities are offering 5,000, 6,000, 7,000. One authority, I think 10,000 I saw as a golden hello to come and work for authorities. Some people are offering huge sums of money to stop in authorities. Somebody told me today 7.5% of your salary each year if you stop with the authority. Now, we can't be in a position to do that. What we've got to do is create the right environment for people to grow our own, to take on newly qualified social workers, to support them properly through that process. And we're going to talk about the Ofsted improvement plan in a minute. And the big messages in there are reduced caseloads. So if social workers have got a reasonable caseload that they feel they can make a difference, then from my experience, they're prepared to say, I'm prepared to take a little bit of a reduced salary because it's a nicer environment to work in. The other thing is I get the proper professional development as support, and we put some proposals in the Ofsted investment stream to create posts to support social workers in doing that. And that's, in my experience, they're more likely to stop in an authority. Yes, money is important for some posts, and we'll look at that, but we don't have to go mad at it and throw loads of money at it when perhaps we don't need to. We can use it more effectively in other areas.
Thank you. Mr. Sheehan?
Yes, I was going to ask the question, can we afford this? But I'm going to ask a different question. Can we afford not to do it?
Well, the answer is no, I would say, because if we don't, I think I've worked in a number of authorities that have been struggling, you know, poor Ofsteds. I've worked in authorities where it was 70% agency staff. So you imagine the financial pressures that places on authorities when you're dealing with, 15,000 for each of those posts. You've got 120 social work posts, maybe 100 of them are agency workers. It's an awful lot of money. And what it's then doing is taking money from services that we want to provide to children and families. So yes, I think we do need to do it, but do it in a measured way. Don't just start throwing money around when we don't need to do it.
Mrs. Seaton.
Thank you, Chair. two observations and one question, really. I worked in schools for many years with a post-16, within a post-16 department, and we do the personal, I don't know, I've forgotten the word now, development for going into university, and I've never come across one that says, I want to be a social worker. Lots of other avenues, but not social worker. It doesn't seem to be on the tip of everybody's tongue. And another observation is I do actually know a social worker, and it's an agency social worker that hops around from agency to agency, and I presume they can do that as well from working with the authority and then just change the mind and working another authority. That's why having a golden handshake, I don't think I would be able to support unless it was attached to staying with the authority for a certain length of time. But I also know somebody who wants to be a social worker but hasn't got the right level of degree. And I just want to clarify, what level of education do you have to become a social worker? Are you asking for masters? Are we aiming too high? Thank you.
To become a social worker now, there is actually a social work degree in social work, and that's the minimum professional qualification that's required. Historically, those of us that qualified a number of years ago will have done our degree and done our social work training as postgraduate, but now you can actually do a degree in social work, and youngsters can go off to university at 18 and study to become a social worker. But it's a BA honours degree, it's not a master's.
Just adding to that, as I think the point was made in the report, and Sharon since made it, is some time ago we used to support people to go on to social work courses. Some of our own staff were unqualified. We stopped doing that, as a number of authorities did, when the market changed, and it was a lot easier to recruit social workers. But now that things have changed again, what we want to do is to go back and look at that, and that's part of our Grow Our Own strategy, so that we've got people that we know are good, committed workers that are going to stop in the authority. Clearly, if you do that, the expectation is they would then come back and stop with the authority for a number of years. So most people that do also play the golden hellos that you talked about, there's usually a 2-year expectation on that you stop in the authority, and if you leave in the 2 years, then they claim the money back. But so hopefully your friend who wants to become a social worker, we'd be more than happy to talk to them, I'm sure, to support them in some way, if we can, or see if we can support them in some way to become a social worker.
Well, I certainly think sort of Grow Your Own is a good idea, because the pool must be very small, and with a lot of people fishing in that pool, it's going to get harder and harder, isn't it? So probably, and I don't believe it's a reduction of standards, because there are vocationally people that want to go, that are caring, and probably have not developed their education soon enough to be able to take that degree, but another one. And I think they need to widen the pool. Thank you.
Mr. Kaufman.
Yes, Chair, thank you. I'm not boasting, but I've got 2 granddaughters. One is in her first year as a teacher and is complaining like hell she can't cope with the work. And the younger one wants to be a social worker. Now, I did tell her that teachers have longer holidays and the usual stuff. And she's now at, well, I suppose it's Leicester College, whatever they call it. And she is struggling to get placements or help or anything like that. And she's finding it extremely difficult. I mean, obviously everybody, the families try to talk her out, but she's one of these determined lasses. But I'm saying that the system is not helping. So that must be one of the problems, because one of the questions sort of has been answered. Are these people leaving the profession? Because all the teachers are complaining that they can't teach anymore and they're leaving the profession and doing better jobs, may have shorter holidays, but better jobs. So is it that people are being promoted, going elsewhere where there's more money, or is it the profession that can't retain people?
I think it's a mixture of the two, and the more recent research says that a lot of social workers don't stay in frontline practice longer than 6 years. Now, there are exceptions to that. Now, some of those people will be those that go into higher management as a team manager and beyond. Some of those will look at different careers in social work. So I mentioned earlier CAFCAS and court officers. That's seen as an option that for an experienced social worker that they want to go into, and is seen as a more controlled environment. The area where workers and social workers find it most difficult, not surprisingly, are around the front door and child protection work, linked to court work from a local authority's point of view. And they are the workers that tend to, after 6 years, not all, but a lot, want to go on to that next level of work or to something different.
Okay, well, I think we note that report, and the committee sees the importance of getting this right for the whole system. I also have apologies from Amanda Wright for her early departure. She's got child commitments, so we'll go on to item 13, the progress report on Ofsted. Again, Paul and Sharon, you're having a long afternoon today.
We remember, colleagues will remember at the last meeting we talked about this. Some members wanted some more detail in terms of the background information to evidence where we are. So it's always a balance when you put these reports together for colleagues, for members, about how much detail you put in. But so we've brought a report back today that Sharon and her team have put together to evidence some of the background work that's actually going on around the plan.
Introduce the report. Thanks, Chair. Yes, as Paul said, and as members of the committee I'm sure will recall, that following the Ofsted inspection that started 12 months today, so it's tattooed onto my brain, we presented, and I presented, a detailed action plan that was our continuous improvement plan, included with the one-page Road to Excellence, which outlined how, as an authority, pulling together under a strategic vision and 4 key aims that are highlighted in this report under paragraph 4, that we were going to work towards and drive and lead the authority towards outstanding. We came back and have been back to overview and scrutiny on a further occasion in September, when we presented our growth bids. So that was the work that we'd undertaken over a period of time to identify any additional resources that we needed to support our improvement plan. And that growth bid was agreed by Cabinet, but Overview and Scrutiny quite rightly asked for an update on our performance against the action plan. So I and staff within the service have pulled off the action plan that you're looking at for Ofsted. Actually says against the 17 Ofsted recommendations what our target is. So the plan works and runs from 2017 to 2020. Where our performance was, where it is now, our evidence of how we can show that we are where we're saying we are, and the additional work that's ongoing in the next phase of the plan. So some highlights on progress are identified in paragraph 7. As members will remember, I'm sure, when Ofsted came and they looked at first response, they commented that children were kept safe and that our child protection work and investigations at the front door were satisfactory and good. but that there was some delay around the services provided to children in need, and that delay was linked to us dealing with some things at contact level that we needed to get more quickly to referral level. So under the progress made, we've reviewed all processes and procedures in first response, and we report, I see daily reports, but we report monthly on the timely and proportionate response to all children. And part of that review has seen a change in the management structure in first response. It's seen a change to our out-of-hours provision. It's seen a change and a tightening to our screening and contact provision, contacts as cases are referred to us, and has seen a real change in the overview and management overview of decision making. We also had a number of newly qualified social workers within the service, and a substantial amount of work has been done with the ASYEs within their newly qualified year to make sure they are supported and have the right levels of supervision and support to progress within the career. The level of children in care with 3 or more placements, so that's how we measure stability for our children in care. So that's improved. We'd seen improvements the year from before last to last year. We'd improved to 10.5%. I think we started at 13 point something, and we're now at 7.6%. So the positive message there is that with support and work with our carers and with our young people, they are staying in placements, which only leads to good outcomes for them. Of the cases audited in June, 87% was showing management oversight graded good or outstanding. So the other percentage was satisfactory, but we measured and focused on that's good and outstanding. I've outlined the number of single assessments completed within timescale, because when you look at the action plan, our percentage within 45 days is slightly lower than, well, it is lower than it was last year, but I've given you the detail behind that in that we are now doing far more assessments. So although our percentage is 74.9% and was 90%, the quality of those 90% wasn't as high as it is now, and we'd completed 191 assessments, where we've now, in September of this year, we were up to 390 being completed. So the number within a month has significantly increased.
Could I just add one thing on that? Is that now brings us much more in line with our statistical neighbours. Previously, before, although our timeliness was good, the number we did was far lower than what other authorities did, and that was the whole point that Ofsted was making. So we now got the numbers up, although our timeliness has dropped back a bit. But for me, and I know for Sharon, that's a better place to be, that we're making sure those assessments are being done, even though it's taking a little bit longer than we would like it to be. At least they're being done.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Rate of re-referrals is another measure of, because if you get, although we would always see some re-referrals to the service, what we wouldn't want to see is children continually re-referred for the same reasons, and the reason for that is because we've not assessed their need or provided the right level of support in the first place. So we do measure ourselves against the rate of re-referrals, and we're showing improvement in that area. Our published adoption scorecard measures is showing that we are performing well in the timelines for children from the decision being made that adoption is right for that child to the child being placed, and then on to the child actually being matched in the first one, and then actually being placed, the adoption order being made rather. We have far more young people supported with their families on special guardianship orders, and we have done a lot of work at strengthening post-order support. So that's post-special guardianship order support, but we've also done significant amounts of work on post-adoption support as well. Care leavers in suitable accommodation. We are performing well against statistical neighbours. A number, we've improved and are better against statistical neighbours for the number of our children that when they are discharged from our care actually return home. Caseload sizes in many of our teams have reduced. We are still struggling with that pressure in some of our strengthening families and child protection teams. So they provide monthly reports to myself and the management team of where those caseload sizes are, and we make sure as a management team that responsibility for addressing that rests at senior management levels. So the expectation is not that social workers take more and have unrealistic caseload sizes. So they are a lot of, or they're some of the key headlines, but obviously there's far more detail provided in the action plan to show you the journey and the progress made to date.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes. Mrs. Seaton.
Yes, thank you. That's right. Thank you. I'm just trying to get my head around this. So, what did you just say, Mrs. Bates?
Carry on, don't worry.
Oh, I thought you did. Sorry. Because I was just totally engrossed in this performance data. But while I'm at it, thank you and sorry. Can you explain to me, it says the accuracy of reporting performance data in first response is closely scrutinised through live reporting via Tableau. Don't know what Tableau is, so that's one thing. Now, I understand that this performance you have and we have the same as we have in adult social care, where we have the performance indicator and whatever, and you extracted these performance indicators out of that and then reported on this. Now, do we know how these sit in relation to national indicators or whatever? So, and, you know, are we better? Are we underperforming? Because the way I'm thinking is this is a road towards Ofsted, isn't it? So how do we travel this road? How do you identify whether you're keeping on target, that you're not slipping? Are you constantly measuring? And how is the process to be continually in order to get to the objective?
I'll try and work through those. Tableau is the data performance reporting that is used by the County Council. So that is the system that enables us to run off daily reports in some areas, some it's monthly, that will show us actually what our performance is and the whether that performance is improving or not, or whether there are areas and difficulties. I do have to say that there is a lot of development work around Tableau, and as we've crossed over from Framework I to Mosaic, there have been some difficulties with some of the reports, and that's why I've put into this improvement plan if we're having to keep some manual data while those reports are developed, because what we can't afford to do is not have that level of performance data available to us. Team managers and service managers will see the data for their areas on a daily basis. They can pull those reports off. But in addition to that, Business Intelligence pull a monthly report off for me and senior managers on all our performance indicators, and they are the national performance indicators, but we also have added to that. So if there are areas that we are focusing on our performance as part of Ofsted that aren't necessarily a national indicator. They're included in our reporting. And that monthly report will show for me and senior managers, because I then take that performance to Paul as director and Ivan as lead member, will show the journey that we're travelling. So they'll show whether we're improving, whether we're not improving. It shows for those that are measured nationally where we sit with our statistical neighbours and where we sit with the England average. The only exceptions to that is if it's a particular indicator that we are focusing on in Leicestershire that other authorities don't necessarily have to report to. So that data comes on a monthly basis. Heads of service and service managers are asked to provide the story behind the data and what action, where they're seeing progress, what action they've put in place to see that progress, but also if there are any dips or any issues, what are the issues, what's caused that dip, and what action is being taken to address it. And then on a monthly basis, I chair a performance meeting with every team manager, every service manager and head of service across children's social care, where we look at that data and they provide reports and challenges to each other about the progress and the journey and what we're doing to address it. So that's Tableau and the story of the performance. And I think I've answered the measures. Yes. Yeah, okay.
Mrs. Seaton.
It's on anyway. Sorry, I hadn't switched it off. Right, if I go to paragraph 7 and number 2, I'm here. It's again the figures and the percentages, and 10.5% in September going down to 7.6%. To me, doesn't mean as much as saying that you've got a 16 reduction. That sounds really good. It's a good reduction there. But percentages doesn't mean anything to me really unless I work it out. I just want to say that this was so easy to read and it was so easy to see the progress that's being made. So I thought it was very, very good. Thank you for that.
Mr. Welsh.
Yeah, I also wanted to comment on the quality of this report and the appendices, which I take Paul's point well, that it's hard to strike the balance. How thick do you want it? But everything I was asking for is contained here, so I'm really, really pleased. It's not just about following it at this meeting. It's there now as something that we can use at all the panel meetings and other meetings, and when we get papers through, to go flick through to here and go, well, that's somewhere in the Ofsted, what were we doing? And it equips us, I think, to be able to quiz better those meetings on what's happening. I've got 2 ever so quick questions. On the performance data on the return interviews, and you talk about those very small numbers, am I reading it correctly saying that these relatively few 11 individuals are just refusing to do an interview? And that led to my thoughts, do we have to use a social worker for that, or could we train foster carers to do it? Or, and then the other one's ever so quick, are we on target for the CAMS contract?
In relation to the return interviews, they're actually now done by our colleagues within Listening and Support Service. So they're not qualified staff. They tend to be staff with a background in youth work or... Okay. And what we've seen is by focusing on that service doing all our return interviews, there is a better consistency and quality. The next phase of that work that I'm chairing a meeting on is we're looking at what we are seeing is that there's an improving picture on the quality of the information that comes from those interviews in helping to plan, do a risk assessment and plan to keep that child safe. And we're seeing a reduction, which is positive, in the number of times that most young people go missing. We've obviously got a core of youngsters that we're still working with where that's not the case, but we are seeing that reduction.
CAMS, the contract I'm a bit of a loss at that one, Sharon. Do you want to?
Yeah. I think you're referring to the CAMS contract around the therapeutic work for children in care, and that there's work ongoing with the head of children in care has been working closely with the service manager in CAMS to renegotiate that contract and to make sure that we're getting the right support for children. Yeah.
Mr. Olds, you wanted to come back?
I wanted to tease Mrs. Seaton because when I was shown all of this information, I was told these are smart targets. I said, no, they're not. They're not precise enough to be smart targets. It is a really good news story. But I think the point you make about not having percentages but having actual numbers is important, particularly on these return interviews. You would only need 3 or 4 fairly prolific young people going missing who each time refuse a return interview, and your percentage figures are going to appear to be nowhere near as good as they should be. I can't ever remember a time, and I do go back a long way, when Scrutiny and Overview have received such an in-depth report, and it's one where you can call officers and myself to account quite easily, but equally I think Sharon and her colleagues have done a really good job.
Mr. Sheehan?
Yes, Chair, thank you. This has come perhaps a little bit earlier than I was expecting, but with your £2.5 million growth bid going in fairly soon, I can understand you wanting to put this out at this time. I rather thought it was dependent on the budget overall, but if you've got it, then very good. But what I was going to ask is, it is a very detailed report, perhaps almost, dare I say it, too detailed, because it's hard to get the overall picture of progress. So I'll just ask the simple question then. Are you confident that you are going to deliver on all your targets? You're going to turn all the ambers to green, or would you care to share with us any concerns you've had? Some areas may be more difficult than others to deliver on, subject to you getting all the money you need, of course.
Yeah, of course. The areas that require closest scrutiny and the areas that would give us most risk would be around the recruitment and retention. So if we have had growth money agreed, we are actively trying to recruit to those posts. While ever we have agency workers in some of those posts, then there is a risk element of that, not only the financial risk, but obviously we have some excellent agency workers that stay for some considerable time, but we also have agency workers that come and can move quite quickly, and that's not good for children and families. With if you're developing a relationship to work with a social worker to look at your assessment, you don't want to change of that worker every 6 weeks. So the biggest challenge to us is getting the staff in place.
But I take it you're confident that the overall progress is on track?
Yes, yeah.
Mr. Olds?
Just to clarify the point about the 2.5 million, Cabinet have agreed that. So it will go in the budget that will be discussed and debated, you're quite right, in the early part of next year. I would hope that nobody would try and tamper with that amount. You're not thinking of voting against it, are you, Sean?
Ivan, you've got the majority in this council, and I just hope that your members see things the same way that you and I do.
Can I just ask about virtual school, because I realise the age range now has increased, and how are we prepared to take on that increase, or have we got any issues there?
We have a very strong virtual school, and Paul, Ivan and myself did one of the keeping in touch visits that Councillor Old referred to earlier to the virtual school only 2 weeks ago, and was able to see the good work that's being done by colleagues there with individual children. There is a pressure because, as all services, we have to look at being more effective and more efficient, and have got some savings that we are needing to and have identified within that provision. The biggest challenge to us is the increased age range and the increased responsibilities under the Social Work and Children Act around children that are adopted. What we're doing is looking at how we work and support schools to provide that. So it is a challenge, it is a risk for us, but we have plans in place, and we've got a really good virtual head teacher that's working extremely hard with staff within that service to provide a high quality service. You can't afford a real one.
Well, thank you. Rosita?
Yes, couple of things. Two, through you, Chairman. Going back, I didn't realise we were on the pink paper already. I was going to ask, could we probably have an...
Rosita, that's actually in the Ofsted report.
Yeah.
There's a minute.
Yeah, well, so I was still on the white paper. So is there any possibility that we can have probably another one of these reports, an action report in the future in a few months' time? Because I think it is really brilliant, and like Councillor Wright said, it is very, very helpful. On the pink one, which is, I wasn't as fast. I'm slowing down.
The pink ones are just for information.
Yes,
Rosita.
but I want to ask a question on that one, because I wasn't there in 2011. Well, not on this committee anyway. So if we are talking...
I know it's tempting every time, but if we go down this road, members will be very unclear. I thought the rule was strictly that we can't ask questions on the pink papers.
Oh. But could we then ask for maybe an update on the pink paper, because there are new legislative rules on that one, and I'm not quite sure how it's going to affect us and how I see our future role on that. So is that possible, Rosemary?
We can bring this as an agenda item at a future white paper, if that's what you want. Mr. Old.
I'm glad you're going to bring it as an agenda item, because it is another example of additional responsibility without any government funding. And it might be worthwhile for this committee to ask for a report that identifies the areas of additional responsibility that haven't been funded centrally, because you all know the position that we're in locally.
Thank you. Is that an agreement agreed by everyone? Okay, thank you. Any more questions? In that case, we accept the report. Can I just remind you of the date of the next meeting of the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee? It will take place on the 15th of January 2018 at 1:30. There are no urgent items, so I'd like to thank you all for attending today. And the meeting's closed.